Hello and welcome to Love, Dating, and Relationships for Spiritual Women. I'm your host, Julie Grimm. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a healer and spiritual guide in the Modern Mystery School. And I'm super excited to have back Danielle LoPresti, who runs Fiat Lux in the Orlando and Central Florida area. So Danielle, hello and welcome.
Hey.
So last time that I had Danielle here, well, actually, I rewatched that interview and I sort of, I commandeered it. Theoretically, we were talking about long-term relationship success, but I definitely asked my dating level questions. So today we are theoretically talking about family and embodying the mother archetype and lover archetype, but we'll see how my own questions add and potentially derail that conversation.
Oh, I love your questions.
I mean, I do too, but I'm clearly biased. Hopefully anybody tuning in also enjoys them. If you don't, you can write me and I can try and include your questions at a later time. So Danielle, in addition to being a healer in the Modern Mystery School and co-founder of Fiat Lux, she's also a wife and mother. And so that's something that I really don't have any experience or too much insight into. So I'd love to pick your brain, Danielle, about, what is the modern family? What does that look like? I think that our understanding of family has evolved hugely, especially even in the last 100 years. Like if we think about that quote unquote, like nuclear family where we had stay-at-home moms, but they weren't really in their power as stay-at-home moms. And now we have this really different story where women are super active in the workforce. But again, maybe there's a piece of empowerment that might still be missing. So what's that next stage or evolution of family that you might see? And, or, how are you embodying family in a way that feels right for you and your own archetype?
Well, first off, I definitely want to highlight what you just said, what works for me. Something I've realized through motherhood in particularly is we can source inspiration from other mothers, but it really is a role that we have to embody ourselves. That term mother knows best means something so differently to me now as a mom. It's not like, listen to your mom, she knows what she's talking about. It's like mothers know what's good for their children and their family more than anyone else. And so I just want to say that first and foremost, because I might have some insight or ideas, but they might not make any sense or align with some other people,
It's not a one size fits all parenting handbook.
No way. But it's interesting because even people who know this, they still subscribe to these different philosophies, right? And some people get so purist and intense about different philosophies, and it's so narrow-minded that they're really neglecting their own personal wisdom and input into parenting or into their family, But
we've sort of been, I think, as women, kind of misled or even taught not to trust ourselves in certain cases. There's been, even just from our physical body, sort of this way that we're separated from even intuitively understanding what does my body need? Or, what's a healthy way for me to eat or to live, and how that might be really unique from one person to the next.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. I even think about as women, how disconnected we are from even our menstrual cycles and our sexuality and pregnancy and birth, and how all of these processes have been either told to be private, or you don't really know, especially with pregnancy and birth. I had a weird obsession with pregnancy and birth from teen years on, and it's something I love to talk about. So if anyone ever wants to talk about it, talk about it.
I didn't know that. I'm learning something new.
Yeah, when someone tells me they're pregnant, I turn into I get really excited and I have to hold back. That's all I want to talk about. But so I had a lot of excitement and knowledge around pregnancy, but if I didn't, it's all too easy to just kind of hand over your experience to your your doctors or your practitioners, you know. I've known so many people who've given birth, and I tell them things about what happened to them that they had no idea, or what was happening with their body, or what was happening with their baby, or choices that they had that they didn't know they had. So you're totally right. Like, as women, we're even just so disconnected from our experience of being a woman that I think being a mother would also just be an extension of that disconnection, unless we're really taking like, we basically just have to take the reins and choose to like go into it ourselves, you know?
Yeah. And choose to maybe both have knowledge, like you were just talking about, where we maybe do research for ourselves so that we have some baseline understanding, but also just trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust ourselves.
Especially when it comes to pregnancy and birth and all of that. It's almost all surrender and trust in like the natural process of what's happening. It's actually pretty miraculous. I mean, I'm so fortunate and grateful that I had a seamless pregnancy and birth. I know that's not always the case for people, but I look back, and of course I was working with a midwife, and I by no means was doing the whole thing myself, but I look back at the experience and like, I could have literally just lived my life and my body would have done the whole thing by itself, you know?
That's
Like,
amazing.
yeah. And I know that that's not the case for everyone, but it is wonderful how most of us can just trust the process. But yeah, going back to your original question, could you repeat it for me?
Yeah, well, so I think where I sidetracked you, and I'll probably continue to sidetrack you, was where you're talking about mother knows best, and understanding and connecting to your own intuitive wisdom when it comes to like yourself, but then also raising your children and caring for your family.
Yeah.
That was where I sidetracked you. I guess my question is, so maybe you can share a little bit about your own experience coming into motherhood and being that matriarch of your family, but then also in this grander scheme of evolution of family, what that means, how we consciously understand family, because I just feel like that is evolving so quickly now. And maybe you could talk a little bit about where you see that going in the future too.
Yeah. Well, I'll cut to the chase and say, I hope and I pray that family in the future, like the sanctity of a family is so special. And I'm learning more about that every day. We've talked before, and you know this about my husband and I have been together for coming up on 12 years this summer. And we were together for 8 years before I got pregnant. So it was like 8 years of just like being completely committed to each other and our love and serving ourselves and serving each other. And then feeling like there was this really, really good foundation and understanding of ourselves and each other to consciously create another person and start a family. And it's so cliche and kind of annoying to hear, but like, you really just don't understand the way you stretch and shift as a parent until you become a parent. And it's an initiation, you know, like you can't explain, it's hard to explain if possible. I don't know. I haven't found a way to explain it, but our relationship changed instantly because it was like the movement of energy between us. All of a sudden there was this other person. So it's like serving ourselves, serving the marriage, serving the family. There was this whole new entity that was created, this whole new relationship of now we're a family. And that like totally took a lot of took growing
It's not
pain.
the same as having a dog.
No. And I mean, I had a dog and I called her my
cat.
baby for a long time, but now my poor dog's neglected all the time because I have a family. And I would love to, I know that, how do I say this? We know it's just a fact that, more marriages end in divorce than don't these days. And marriage is the foundation of a lot of families, sometimes not. Like, I know a ton of people who have beautiful families that aren't married, or families that are co-parents and whatnot. But the idea of family, it seems like it's kind of been torn apart a little bit, or at least it's not as, it's definitely not a glamorous thing, I think, in society at this point. There's like all these, I think about like TV and movies, how it kind of talks about like how marriage is like the end of a certain kind of lifestyle, or end of like the magic and the romance, and having a family is like, or having kids is like this ball and chain. And yes, it is responsibility, but I mean, I don't think a lot of people want a lot of responsibility now, right?
I mean, that whole adulting thing,
Yeah,
it's like, adulting can be fun.
yeah,
Adulting can be exciting. Adulting can be like opening new doors of understanding and power and empowerment. But oftentimes we simply relate to adulting as like this thing that I just want to do and then binge watch Netflix and drink wine.
yeah. And it's like that saying, like with power comes responsibility, and also goes the other way around too. It's with great responsibility, you have like more power, and what that means is different for everyone. But, as far as how like my life changed, how I changed becoming a mother and stepping into a family in regards to, like my relationship, I always, I've always like associated, we've talked about this before, with like the archetype of the lover. And that meant one thing when I was a maiden, and it meant a different thing as a mother.
Wait, so let's, for anybody tuning in, maybe they are not familiar with archetypes. So let's even slow down just a little bit more. What do you mean when you say that you identify with the archetype of a lover?
Yeah. So simply put, I guess I would say, when I talk about archetypes in general, I'm talking about kind of these, the word character comes to mind, but mostly it's like, kind of like these picture perfect, almost like role model characters. So the ones I just said, like the lover, the mother, the maiden. We've also talked about like the priestess, the queen. So these are all like women archetypes. The crone. What else is there? Help me out.
Well, there's one, is it the Seraphina? I might be getting that. Sophia. There's the one that's like inquisitive, scholastic inquisitor.
So yeah, like the intellectual. But yeah, so in womanhood, I feel like is usually broken up into the maiden, the mother, the crone, based on different phases of the life of a woman. Simply put, the maiden is usually the archetype that we associate with someone before they become a mother, and then crone is like the woman, the elder woman with deeper wisdom through life experiences. Granted, not all people birth children, but you can still embody the mother. And then some people have children, but still live in maidenhood. These aren't like cut and dry
Right.
examples.
I mean, I'm even thinking, have you heard of like gamine? Because there's different ways to talk about archetypes. And so I know archetypes in part come through like Carl Jung's work. But I know too, even like style wise, you could do a like, what's my style archetype? And gamine is one that's kind of like the Audrey, I would consider it like maiden, which is like the Audrey Hepburn. Like she's not very, there's nothing really maternal about her. It's kind of like more, and even with the zodiac signs, you could actually start to place those, for example, in archetypes. And that's sort of like the eternal youthful character.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, where was I going? So yeah, I feel like, at least for me, moving from the maiden archetype, which for me just felt most of my energy was being like flowed into me and my experience of life, and as lover into my partner. And then all of a sudden, like I was saying, being initiated into motherhood and having a daughter, it's becoming a mother. It's like, it's not like you like have a baby and all of a sudden you're a mother. It's like, it kind of phased in, I feel like, around pregnancy, and it still is something that's evolving for me. But the biggest thing was, all of a sudden, like the energy wasn't just directed to what I was focusing it on, whether it was my husband or myself. It was like I had all of a sudden this container just spread wide open. And visually in my mind, I see that as like the family, right? Where all of a sudden I could direct it to one particular thing, but now all of a sudden I'm holding like this nest, for not just me and my partner, but for someone else. And Julie, we've talked before about this transition for me, but it was interesting because I had learned so much about myself and about the divine feminine and how I really wanted to step into motherhood and how I really wanted to embody a mother in alignment with herself and with the divine feminine. And it was still so much healing and so much work to learn that like my power didn't need to necessarily come from, for example, previously I always made more money than my husband. I always worked more and worked harder than my husband. I was way more productive than him. I did everything in the house and I also did everything outside the house. And when Audio was born, I stopped working. So there was like this huge healing process and self-love and appreciation process that had to take place for me to just feel okay with the work I was doing did not create results outside of me. It's like this, all of a sudden, all of this, I use the word relentless, but like relentless work that you're putting in all the time as a mother, especially as a newborn baby toddler mother, you don't see it, it's like all day here. For example, it's like feeding baby, taking care of cloth diapers, grocery shopping, just taking care of your house. And then the next day it's trashed again. It's like, there's nothing to show for all the work you're doing. It's more of just like this sustaining. The energy goes into sustaining and slowly growing. Now that Adi is 3, it's interesting. I was just having this conversation with a mother friend the other day where there's so much patience. Like it feels masculine and it feels a lot like how my life looked before becoming a mother, where I had an idea of what I wanted to do. I did it and I saw a result, right? Or I had a choice to make. I made the choice. I saw a result. Now with like my daughter, it's like I make these small choices. For example, how we put her to bed at night, what she eats, the kind of stories we read to her, who's in her life, but we don't see the results for a really, really long time. So there has to be like this really deep trust in your choices, and you have to like be able to like hold the potential and hold the energy for it to like follow through and hold the consistency. So it's like the work is so different from what I think most people, especially women, are used to, where like you said, now it's like we live in this world where women are just as in the workforce as men are, and like we do typically very masculine things all the time. But for me, the work of specifically being a stay-at-home mom or being home with my daughter for the first 3 years of her life, it was more of holding than doing. It's like I had to hold the potential, hold the vision, hold the consistency so that like the bigger goals could be achieved. And I say too, to a lot of my women friends and my mother friends too, it's like, don't underestimate the fact that like you're the matriarch of the family now, like you're the source of feminine energy for the whole family, and everything comes through the woman first, right? It comes through femininity first. So it's like my energy affects everything. Like, and it's not just my husband and my daughter, it's my animals, it's my house, it's the energy of everything in our life. And so we really underestimate as mothers the work that we're doing that shows no fruits out in the world all the time, right in front of our eyes. And I think because of that, we overwork ourselves. We try to prove way too much to ourselves and to the world. And I think that's why a lot of moms get really burnt out. And I think that's why a lot of marriages start to suffer and fail after the baby's born. And I also think it's why it's so typical for moms to joke about drinking a bottle of wine at the end of the day and, motherhood becoming this chore. It's because we're just doing too much and not appreciating the what we naturally bring to the table. And I'm saying this after some really, really, really hard healing moments. Like I said I had an easy birth and an easy pregnancy, but the first year after my daughter was born postpartum, I did not have an easy time. And I was like really anxious and really depressed and had a really hard time basically becoming a mother, So I just want to mention that it's not just something that came naturally to me. It's something I've had to like work really hard for and continue to work hard for, like seeing and valuing what I bring to the table that isn't so like typically appreciated in the world. Like I said,
Yeah.
it's working nonstop without really being able to show anything for it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we do live in a patriarchal society. You know, we might be moving out of that energy, but we have lived for quite some time from a state where masculine energy has been seen as greater than,
Mm.
or been more valued or prized. And I think that's a big part, like you were saying, of the work that we need to do is actually reassign that value,
Mm.
even just within our own psyches, to the unseen. Like you were saying, trust. I was like, yeah, oh my gosh, that must take so much trust and so
Yeah.
much faith, because it's literally unseen. We see it later. We see it maybe in the fruits, but maybe even we don't for quite some time see it in the fruits, but we just have to trust that it's there. And it's so interesting because, of course, now I'm going to talk about dating. I have a scientific background. So I attract a lot of people who are like in the sciences. And the sciences is so about conclusive evidence. It's so about, what can I see? What can I put a number to? What can I count? And in some ways that's very patriarchal, actually, because it's putting all this emphasis on what's concrete. And not to say that it is valuable, but it's not the only thing. And what I always talk about is like, you know, modern invention has allowed us to see and count things we could never see and count before, but it didn't mean that those things didn't exist. We simply didn't have the tools to see them or perceive them. And maybe that's the same too with a lot of the results of the feminine force. We simply don't have the apparatus to see or count or understand or have clarity, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. And that doesn't mean that it has a huge positive effect on what's going on. You know, I just think about the soil, for example, that allows trees to grow. I mean, now we have a lot of soil science, and you can do measurements of what's in the soil, but even before we had that, people understood soil needed to be able to nourish the trees. They might not have seen every single or understood or named every molecule and mineral that needed to be there, but there was this understanding like it needed to be healthy in order for the tree to be healthy. And so it makes me sad when I'm on dates with these scientists. I understand it, but where people are so rely so heavily on evidence, on what can be seen. And I think that that's also just a representation of societally this patriarchy that we're now kind of moving out of, but this over reliance on the concrete to inform how we live and ultimately, like what you were saying, how we assign value to life.
Yeah, it's such a small fraction of life is what we see. And I think in a family situation, a lot of the times the easiest measure of value is who's bringing in the money and paying the bills, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, because we can count it. We can say this month it was this month it was that. I worked X amount of hours, but that unseen time and energy, and even just, I know in our last episode, we talked a lot about love, like that nourishing, nurturing force of love. How can you calculate that?
Exactly. How can you? But my husband will say firsthand, like he wouldn't work as hard as he does, and he wouldn't have accomplished what he's accomplished if it wasn't for perhaps the expectations I've put, but I haven't put like verbal expectations. It's just I guess the easiest way to put it is I love him so deeply. So what do I deserve? You know, what kind of life do we deserve? You know?
Or that vision, like you were saying, holding that container for a higher vision of your daughter's life, of your life, and of the life of your family.
Yeah. And, you know, I think it's, if you go back into like these kind of stereotypical roles, and I'm pretty immersed in the world of motherhood, and I have friends that span everywhere in that world of motherhood. And there's so many like really unfortunate like similarities I see where it's like mom's really overworked and burnt out. She's annoyed with her husband, like her husband's just like another kid. And then it perpetuates this this cycle of like moms trying to overcompensate so they're burnt out, so they don't give their husband, they don't have a relationship with their husband like they used to have, where it's like they love each other, they enjoy each other, they support and respect and see and appreciate each other. So it's like the husband probably perhaps doesn't reciprocate, or also doesn't like step into deeper, like into a higher role for himself. And it just kind of like becomes this cycle of like exhaustion and expectations not met. And but it's like what you're saying, like what doesn't fuel it is like this love. And that, not to say men don't love, because they certainly do, but I do feel like that is kind of what the mother and what the woman can bring in, maybe a little bit more naturally, is like the beauty of the home. Like we totally underestimate the whole concept of the housewife or the homemaker. This has almost become like a derogatory or less than kind of occupation. Side note, I have a friend in Oregon who's actually creating her master's around the art of homemaking, and I thought it was
I
incredible.
love that.
Yeah,
Well, I
because
think part of the derogatory understanding of it is that historically people were homemakers but didn't have any independence. You know, they weren't being valued. Maybe they didn't value themselves, and they didn't really have a sense of themselves separate from that. You know, like they didn't have, and they were also societally maybe exempt from even participating in other activities outside of being a homemaker. So it wasn't really a choice. It
yeah,
was something that was foisted upon them.
for sure. And I think culturally too, in a lot of places, it was like, well, if you have the luxury of staying home and not working, then it's like you're almost, it's almost like you're like indentured into that role, you know, where it's like man makes all the money and supports your life so that you have the privilege of staying home. But, or at least I feel like that's honestly like a story we're telling ourselves right now. Like I've even heard like comedians make jokes about like, I just want to stay home, I just want to do this. But the whole staying home thing is kind of creating the reason for the man to go out, right? Like, do you see what I'm saying with like this cycle? It's I know, and you and me have talked privately about this before, just as friends, where it's like the art of creating a beautiful life is not something to be underestimated or undervalued. It's like I've seen relationships, specifically with husbands, wives, and children, like really start to suffer and crumble because it's like there's no beauty and passion. It's all just like mechanical, and we do this, you do this, I do this, you take care of this, I take care of this, instead of like, what is our life? What is our family? What is our home? And I think about my paternal grandmother in particular. She's this adorable little Italian woman, and every day looked dressed to the nines. She was beautiful, and her food was beautiful, and her home was beautiful. And like you said, I feel like this almost kind of seemed like a less than role in the past, even what was that, maybe like 40, 50, no, yeah, like 40, 50 years ago, you know, when she was like raising kids. But it's something that's, I think, almost completely absent now. Like, I feel like the moms that I know that are really stepping into that like beauty homemaker roles, like it's like this like rogue, magical little witchy existence, you know, there's not a lot of like role models around it.
It's sort of like a rebellion against a rebellion.
Yeah, because it's like, I'm going to stay home and I'm going to be valuable and I'm going to be worshiped as a queen. And I'm also not going to feel bad about myself for not making the money. And I'm not going to feel bad about myself for not being hyper productive and being into all these different things. And there's nothing wrong with that either. Like we can do so many things. It's just, I just know personally, I've suffered through the expectations I've put on myself to be like this super mom, where it's like, I'm doing everything perfect with my kid. I'm also in super great shape. And I also have a side hustle, and I also make money. And I also, you know, it's
yeah, that's like the soccer mom, or like the Lexus driving Pilates woman, which again like absolutely nothing wrong with.
girl. Yeah.
When we put the pressures on ourselves to be something other than what we are.
Yeah. I think it just circles back to all those things are wonderful, and everyone has a different level of what they can and want and desire to accomplish in a day. But what I'm learning is that the magic that a mother in particularly brings to, or feminine brings to a family is more like what you said, the slow and steady and consistent expansion and growth of a family instead of the like laser focus of things. Because I mean, for example, I think about my daughter Adia. She was with me for 3 years. I completely and totally dedicated being home with her, and then we decided to put her in school, which is like a really weird choice to like all of a sudden trust someone else to influence her every day in another environment to influence her every day, all while like COVID's going on and I can't really be super involved and I can't go in the classroom. So I had to make a choice knowing I wouldn't see the results for a while. I wouldn't know if it was a good choice for quite some time. And I had to stick through her having like crying fits before school and being really exhausted and like relapsing on potty training and just really like holding the vision and staying consistent. And now a couple of months later, she's doing so well, you know, and she loves it and she loves her teachers. And but it's like if I hadn't trusted the choice and trusted myself, I would have very easily just taken her out of school and been like, that's too much for her. And like, how would my family have suffered because of that? How would have she suffered, or me or my husband because of that?
It takes
Yeah.
so much patience too, what you're talking about, like
Yeah.
so much patience and faith and trust to commit yourself to something that you can't see and you don't see tomorrow. You might not even see a month from now. It's huge. It's huge.
It's huge. And it's yeah, it's I keep just seeing this vision of like, yeah, just expanding so much like with motherhood, because it's all of a sudden you're completely in service to someone else, right? But you also have to be in way deeper service to yourself so you can serve the rest of your family. Because I think about how this is also like another trap I feel like a lot of women get in when they become a mother, is to become like a martyr, right? Where it's like, by all means necessary, who cares how much I suffer? I'm going to give my family everything. You know, my children deserve every second of my time, and my family deserves all of my energy. And, you know, it's like, we've all seen it, you know, that people become just a mother, right? And like everything gets put into it. And I've even like heard and felt this narrative in circles of mothers I've been around, where it's like almost the more you suffer and the more you sacrifice, the better of a mother you are. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which isn't going to end well for mom, you know, or maybe like the
Or
relationship
the
between mom and
family.
dad, or the family, right?
Or the family. It's
Mhm.
funny because in my office, I see that a lot too, that people sort of martyr themselves for the work.
Mm.
But it's super interesting because athletes, I think, do it less. And because there's this understanding, like my athletic ability rests on my ability to care for my body and take breaks when I need it. So if I'm going to run a marathon, I actually can't burn myself out physically because I'm never going to get there. So I need to learn how to create like a balance. And that's been something that's really interesting for me, because it's like, again, it kind of goes back to that the patriarchal view of like, I need to do, where I would position like science against art, which would be like this science being this sort of concrete evidence-based study, and art, which is also really sadly leaving most schools. It's not being funded. People aren't prioritizing it. You could say like, well, what's the point? What's the point of art? And you could do the same thing with feminine energy. I don't see it. What's the point? I can't count it. It's not giving me all these numbers. Is it going to give me a paycheck? I don't know. But without balance, without the two, without resting so that you can run your marathon tomorrow, you know, ultimately without that longer term vision, you're just going to burn yourself out.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And a lot of the sad thing there for me too is that there's a pride in it, that it's somehow become societally like you get a badge of honor for burning yourself out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But any marathon runner, anybody who played a team sport will know that if your teammate burnt themselves out and you're now down a person, you're not giving them the badge of honor. They don't get MVP because they weren't able to, for whatever reason, sustain their energy. so that they could make it for whatever the game or the long distance run or whatever it is. It's like
Right.
the track star has balance also.
Yeah. And same could be said, even looking at like the idea of like a family. If like mom is putting all of her energy and like going, go, 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 trying to be super mom, perhaps it's like, if that comes at a detriment to relationship with her partner, it's like at the end of the day, the whole family collapses. It's like, we can't
Right.
laser focus on one thing when there's like, yeah, a bigger picture. And like the athlete is a perfect analogy. Like you said, it's like, I can't get everything done if I blow up my ACL, you know? So I know like I got a lot of opinions and judgment for moms, for example, when my daughter was born. So here's another thing. We have expectations of ourselves. Before I was born, I had all these ideas of how I'd be a mother and like how into attachment parenting I'd be, which is, if that's what you're into, that's wonderful. If that's what works for your child and your family and your relationship, great. I learned really early on, my bed is for me and my husband. I need sleep. I need marital relations. I need these things, you know? And so real quickly, we decided to sleep train her, which is something I never thought I would do. And something I got so many opinions about. But at the end of the day, she may have had like a hard time, and it would have been real easy for me just to go in and save her, and I'll suffer. I won't sleep. I won't hang out with my husband. So you're okay. But at the end of the day, she's been a great sleeper since she was 4 months old, and my marriage is in a pretty great spot, you know? So it's like, sometimes like even though it seems like we're being a better mom by sacrificing our sleep and breastfeeding them to sleep and letting the dad sleep on the couch and just doing whatever it takes to like be a good mom, at the end of the day, I can't even imagine how my marriage would have suffered if I hadn't been able to be a wife as well, you know?
Yeah. That goes back to what we were talking about with the archetypes. And I
Mhm.
know before this call, we mentioned the multidimensionality of all humans, but of
Mhm.
women, and how we are meant to be more than just one archetype, and how we embody more than just one archetype. And so kind of when you were talking right there, it reminded me, like, if we only think of ourselves as a mother, we don't see that actually we're multidimensional beings, that we have other important parts of ourselves that need to be expressed. We're kind of like cutting off parts of who we are, or at least closing the door on them for like 18 years.
Yeah.
um,
And it's hard to
which is
open that back
nonsense.
up, because we hear like the term like empty nesters, how like depressed moms get when their kids are out of the house. And sure, I'm sure parents miss their kids, but a lot of it's because they're like, what, like, who am I now? What do I like? What do I do? How do I reconnect with my husband after 15 years, 20 years? Yeah, so I think for the longevity of joy and purpose in life, especially with family, like we have to remember that and it's really difficult. I'm going to tell you firsthand, it's really difficult when you're a new mom to know how to identify with anything other than that, because it's so intense and overbearing, and it's like the whole world that you're in. And especially for me, after becoming a mother, I feel like everything about me changed. And the easiest thing for me to identify with was a mother. Like, I didn't know. I remember my husband telling me, like, I'll watch the baby. You go out for the next couple hours and do whatever you need to do to make yourself feel good. I'm like, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know what I like. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I'm interested in. I don't know what I want to do with my time. So I can see and empathize and understand how easy it is just to be like, I'll just be the best mother I can possibly be, because it's scary to like be, my midwife was amazing, but I remember she always reminded me that the birth of the baby, she's like, it's also the birth of you as a mother. You're new now. Like, remember that you're still a baby mom, and you have so much to learn about yourself and about the world as a mother. And like I said, I feel really grateful that going into motherhood, I really prepped myself out and reminded myself that I wanted to continue to be those other facets of who I am, right? Even if that's changed. And on the subject of archetypes, I've always identified as a lover, someone who that is a very multidimensional archetype in general anyway. But I find it really important and fun to work through the distortions around what it means to be a mother and also be a lover. Because I think in our society, we look at women who have children as like off the market, kind of like out of their prime.
Like they're not sexual beings anymore.
Yeah.
As if you have a child and you just, it stops.
Yeah. I mean, this is like very common, I feel like, in media in general, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe it's changing a bit, which is wonderful. And maybe it's only changing for me because I expose myself to really sexy moms, but I don't know how the rest of the world sees it.
I mean, there is that whole MILF thing that happens.
That is true.
That's
but
true.
There's like this different kind of sexiness where, if I'm being completely candid, I feel like I matured sexually after my daughter was born. Like, I feel like she almost activated something in me that wasn't there before. And
that's like a new, never mind, I won't go there.
No,
I was going to say that's going to be, like a new, like activate your sexual prowess, have a baby.
I always joke that she must have like pressed some buttons on the way out. She's like, ding, 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 upgrade. And like,
I love that so much.
Yeah, I'll tell her someday.
You will. You'll have to tell her someday.
But
it's a commitment, folks. It's not just about like bringing a new toy to bed. That's different.
Yeah, it's very true. But she was, yeah. So I feel like now embodying the lover as a mother this is like an archetype that I feel like is not very common in the world. And I mean, we already have so many distortions around motherhood, so many distortions around the lover, so many distortions around sexuality and pleasure, and women with sexuality and pleasure. It feels like this really fun, it feels like kind of like a mission for me to like learn how to be that in alignment, especially because a lot of those archetypes all come down to like me being in full authenticity with myself and purity with myself. And those words probably feel very like counterintuitive to some people, purity and sexuality, but they do live within each other. And I'm learning to try and understand more and more every day what that means. But yeah, because I think as when you're younger or when you're a maiden, sexuality usually means, how do I say this? It's like, you can't take sexuality and sex out of the equation, but it's like, as a mother, it's almost like an essence and a way of being, the mature sexuality, where I don't even know. It's almost like less of an approachable or an attainable sexuality from someone outside of them. It's just something to be admired, right? Or something to witness, not something to engage in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or like embodiment. It's an embodiment of, it's almost like it's something that you embody. You're like, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
this
so
is me and my sexuality.
Yeah. And like growing up, I never talked about sex with my mom. I wouldn't, like, no offense to my mother, I'm sure she'd agree. I never looked at her as a sexual being. She never expressed herself as a sexual being. And I think that like, anytime you think about being a mother or father and sexuality, there's like all this like thought about inappropriateness, but like you can still like look sexy and be sexy and embody sexuality and embody like the sexual relationship I have with my husband without it being inappropriate. It can just be something that's inspiring, hopefully, for my daughter someday. And I mean, even the way I talk about sexuality openly as just like almost like a biological function, so it's nothing taboo or weird or scary or shameful for her. I think if mothers were able to embody their sexual expression more, it could have a lot of really great benefits for their sons and daughters later on in life, because like I said, my mother, who I should have learned all these things from, I've never spoken about sex to her,
And even before children, like you were saying with your partner, just to keep that element of your relationship alive through all of those changes of motherhood and fatherhood that come along with it, and not losing that, not letting that go. It's huge.
And I can't give anyone like the magic formula for keeping that alive, because that's very individualized, and it's not as simple as like keep having sex with your husband, because it's
It's your duty. Then that's where we start to get into
Yeah,
that old patriarchal story where it's like, be a stay-at-home mom, have dutiful sex, where there's all kind of this, on paper, it's like, great, now you can have all this time and energy to make your house beautiful and you're having a loving, but the actual truth of it is like, you're kind of a prisoner in your own creation.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, for me, like I said, I've always kind of been a very sexual person and like, and really felt like the lover archetype. So I remember even after my daughter was born, there's like the whole fun, like set amount of time, like you're not allowed to be sexual, right? And most people don't want to be. Fun fact though, is that you're the most fertile you'll ever be in your life right after you have a baby. So people usually actually really want to have sex after they have a baby.
Oh,
That's where the
wow.
Irish twins comes in, when people get pregnant right after another baby.
Oh, wow. Good. It's kind of
Exactly.
good to know, actually. You're like,
Yeah.
note taken. Ugh, unless you want that, like,
Well, like I'm saying, as a woman, it's just like, it's cool for us to know about our bodies a little bit more. But I remember like not like being like this crazy horn dog and wanting to like have sex with my husband. It was like, oh, I just want to be like back in my body again. Like I want to be like, whew, like with you and with myself again. But I also don't know if that's everyone's experience with sex. And sex is a really not taboo subject, but it has to be approached with gentleness, because everyone has a very different relationship with sex, because sex in the world is so distorted, right? Like a lot of people have experiences of like bad sexual relationships with people or abuse, whole
yeah.
spectrum, you know? So for me to say that, like, I just really wanted to have sex after my daughter was born, to be able to feel myself and feel my husband and connect again, is just a testament to the things I've had to work through, you know, to get to that place. But
Well, in some ways, our sexual expression, it's so personal. Like everybody's going to express themselves really differently. So yeah, when we talk about it, it's like, well, this is me and that's her and that's you over there. And of course it's going to be unique because it's like literally your creative life force.
yeah.
So why would it be like anybody else's creative life force? Like that's not even, doesn't make sense. And yet that's how we want it to be. Like
Yeah.
copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. No, pretty much not.
No,
But,
not at all.
also when you were talking, it reminded me like, we want to embody that multidimensionality. So for you, mother and lover archetypes, but it's almost like for yourself first. So you were saying you wanted to be sexual with your husband, but not necessarily like for your relationship, for you to be back in contact with your own sexual expression and to not lose that through the development of your identity as a mother.
Right. Because after, like, for me, like 6 weeks of like hard time breastfeeding and birth and all these things, I'm like, I just want to feel like a woman. Like, I don't want to, like, I want to feel like myself. I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't, I don't want to, like, I
Yeah.
almost want to escape motherhood a little bit, if anything.
Like put down that identity for a moment and pick up that lover energy.
Yeah, the other part of me. And I think this also comes into play, for example, for women who embody more of like the queen archetype, and maybe that's why they go back to work right away, or they are like really involved in the things that they've built and the businesses or the communities they've built before having a child, like right away. And it's like there's always going to be judgment and opinions in the mother world. I've learned this. But sometimes serving your family means stepping away from your family and like going right back to work, or trying to think of, yeah, like the intellectual, it's like going right back to school, or making sure that you're fulfilling all these other parts and these other hats that you wear. Because I mean, I think we all have experienced, whether it be through our own firsthand experience, through the experience of our families growing up, or friends, TV, whatever it is, we've seen what it looks like when a mother is burnt out. Like we've talked about this, and the mother just isn't connected to her joy, isn't connected to her sexuality, her purpose, her mission. It can look as subtle as, like I said, empty nesting syndrome, and they're sad, or people who have complete identity crises and don't know who they are, don't know how to actually serve their kids. Like I've known people who, like, for example, their mother was like that super mom who did everything for them. They did their laundry, they cooked meals for all the kids, they did everything you could possibly think of for the kids. but then, yeah, they had this terrible marriage. They never actually like got to fulfill the things they wanted to fulfill in life. And later on, the kids had to learn to do those things themselves, which was really hard. So it's like sometimes when we think we're actually doing the best for our kids by doing everything for them or being super mom, it like everyone ends up suffering, right? And so the example I use that kind of relates to this, we were talking earlier about putting Adia in school. Like it was really hard for me, and I knew it was going to be really hard for her, and in some ways hard for Jake. But the result, even though we all had to go through something a little bit difficult, was that she's more independent, I'm more independent, he's more independent, and or when I like sleep trained my baby, like she would cry at night. She was really sad, and like I was tired because I had to go in all the time, and I was tired, so I wasn't the best wife. We all just suffer a little bit. But then my daughter slept 12 hours a night, which is great for her immune system and great for her development. And me and Jake got time alone. So it's like sometimes like doing the really hard, weirdly uncomfortable thing actually like serves the family more,
I mean, so much of what you're saying, I can't relate to, but what
And
I
in some
can
ways
relate,
you can.
but what I can relate to is, being an initiate. I mean, I just keep thinking about Empower Thyself, for example, where we talk about what true empowerment is. And true empowerment is not doing everything for another person. I'm a healer, I'm a spiritual guide, but at the base of it all, I don't actually heal somebody. I don't support them by doing it for them. I don't support them by telling them who they are and what they do. I'm not a guru. I support them by helping them discover for themselves who and what they are. And then a lot of that comes through the Empower Thyself class, where they're actually given space to step up for themselves and to learn for themselves, like, what is my truth? Who am I? And yes, sometimes it looks ugly. And sometimes there's missteps, and sometimes we make mistakes, but we are actually, this was a huge thing for me to realize, we're actually maybe meant to make mistakes. Maybe actually making mistakes is part of the process. Maybe not making the mistake is the mistake.
Yeah. And honestly, it's very, very few people on the planet become a guide in our lineage, right? But think about all the people who become parents and like approaching raising children in the same way. We're holding the potential for them to be themselves, not actually doing everything for them, but giving them the parameters and safety to discover who they are, to make mistakes, to make a mess, to express themselves, to have the uncomfortable experience so they can learn themselves. I only have a 3-year-old and I do this on a daily, so I can only imagine what it's like when she's like 15 and she really wants to do something I don't want her to do, but
Right.
as a guide,
Right.
it's very similar. You hold very similar energy as a mother.
And you do that through having done it for yourself first, because I took the Empower Thyself initiation almost 6 years ago now. And through that energy that's given to you, you start to understand, where am I not taking responsibility for my life? Where maybe am I over responsible for other people, that I need to take a step back because I'm actually depleting myself, I'm martyring myself. And at the end of the day, they're not really living how they could be living. I'm actually taking power in a sense away from them that they could step into. But then also, where am I disempowering myself, where I could actually take a more active role? Yeah.
Yes.
And then through that, it's like becoming a mother to yourself.
Yeah. And this totally is reminding me of so many lessons that I feel like I've had over the last couple of years with even, raising a child with another person, like having a family. So I feel like it's all too easy for the women to take on all the roles, like we were saying. But I've also seen, specifically even in my friend groups, very conscious, wonderful women, is they have a very specific way they want things done. So they just do it themselves. They do everything themselves. And a lot of the times fathers don't end up fathering. They're just mothering the way, because they're doing everything mom wants them to do, or the house. Yeah. And I had a slap in the face realization of this when Adia was really young, because I used to be a nanny. Like I used to be in childcare. So I was just like this expert in babies. And I kind of like took the reins on everything about how everything was going to be done, how she got cleaned, how she got fed, how her things got washed, where things went, when she ate, how she ate. Like I was the expert, and Jake just kind of followed along and listened to my instructions. And then perhaps that's like a very necessary thing early on. But I remember we were going for a hike one day, and Adia was plopping along, and she just like face planted on the ground, and both of our reactions were very different. His was, hey, like, Adia, you okay? And I just like quickly like went and got her, and we had this almost argument, because I was like, no, she's a baby and we need to do this, this, and this, and like she needs to know we're there for her. And he was like, yeah, also she needs to like know she's fine. Long drawn out example, but we sometimes like put so much extra pressure on ourselves to like make sure everything's perfect and done a particular way that I wasn't empowering my husband to be a father. I was asking him to do everything the way I wanted him to do it. And I wasn't empowering my daughter to be a little bit more independent. I was just doing everything for her so she wouldn't suffer. Which is very similar to what you're saying.
Such a deep lesson there. It's almost like giving space. It's like the faith and the courage and the patience to give space for people to make mistakes, or at least do it differently than you would do it, but almost like allow that life to exist separate from you.
Yeah, and allow them to be themselves. This has been a huge lesson for me in the last year of where does my lack of independence manifest in a lack of independence for the rest of my family? Or how can I take more responsibility over myself to allow the people in my family to take more responsibility over themselves? And I mean, we talked about this before the call, where I realized recently, like the reason I decided to start when we moved to like get more active in building a healing practice and going back to work more, it's like for me to embody that independence, whether it be financially, career-wise, spiritually, all these things. For me to be more independent allows my daughter to be more independent, and then allows my husband to be more independent. And this also comes back to what I said in the beginning, as the matriarch, everything kind of trickles, right? So it's like the levels of responsibility I take over myself, I get to see manifest in their lives too. Because it's like I chose to have control in all these places where I didn't necessarily need to or want to. It actually just ended up making all of us suffer. And coming back to where you're saying the mistake is actually where the lesson is learned. Like we're told so many times that the road to success is paved with failure, right? How can we ever actually truly know who we are, understand ourselves, or embody who we are unless we're given the space to screw up, and figure out who we're not and what we're not, right? And yeah, I'm realizing right now, like all these similarities between your work as a guide and a parent, it's very, very similar.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy that's similar there. And it is actually an initiation. But it all goes back to like, what is actually empowerment? What is empowerment? And as a guide, I'm going to make mistakes. There might be times I think I'm helping somebody where actually I'm disempowering them.
Yeah.
Or yeah, or maybe I'll give them too much space. Maybe they need more love and care. And, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do everything perfectly, but I'll try. I'm going to try. I'll do my best, at every moment. But it also teaches me, like you were saying about watching your daughter and watching your husband interact, it teaches me also more about myself, about me. Where am I disempowering myself? Where am I being overly controlling?
Yeah.
I don't need to be. I don't actually like what, and then ultimately, where is that coming from within me?
It's like, am I being over controlling because I'm trying to distract myself from something else? Like if I have so much control over this, I don't have to look at that. Or if I'm an expert at this, I can just neglect that. Like if I can be the perfect mom, I don't have to look at all the other parts of myself I'm neglecting because I'm the best mom and that's all anyone sees, but yeah, it's so multidimensional.
It's so humbling.
Yeah, it is.
It's so humbling, but that's kind of the beauty also, is that we are allowed to continue to grow. We're not, we didn't just reach a destination and park our car and say, great, I'm here. Look what I've mastered. It's like, okay, well, what's next? What's that next thing for you to grow into, and almost in a way like experience a new side of yourself that maybe you haven't experienced yet,
Mhm.
and then express that into the world.
Yeah, it's very true. And circling back around to like the very first question you asked, like, how would I envision like the evolution of family? Um, there's a lot to be said about that, but what's coming to my mind right now is kind of like the evolution too of like mothers and like community of mothers and how mothers treat each other in the world. Because it's like we hold so many, as within so without, we hold so many expectations and judgments of ourselves, and we undoubtedly do it towards each other. Sometimes we do it towards each other to make ourselves feel better about ourselves, consciously or unconsciously or what have you. But yeah, we're always, as mothers, we're also so many other things. So it's like to have more like support and more humility and more forgiveness for each other. Becoming a mother has made me look at every other person who has birthed a child in a completely different light, you know? And I don't know if everyone feels the same way who's had children, you know, but I would love to see like the future of like mothers be like a more of a tribal thing where everyone supports each other in their dreams and not just in motherhood, right? Because I'm so fortunate to have a handful of really wonderful mother friends that really root for me when it comes to my marriage or it comes to my career, or it comes to whatever goals it is I'm working on outside of my daughter. Because it'd be all too easy for them to make me feel bad for neglecting her and doing those other things, you know?
I
And
remember reading Brene Brown about shame. She wrote a
mhm,
book, I think it might even be called Shame. And I was really struck. She's talking about different types of shame, and that she was talking about the shame of motherhood, and how basically there's this whole structure where people shame mothers and mothers shame mothers. And I was, it was kind of eye opening for me because I'm really not involved in that scene. But when I read it and then I started to pay attention, I was like, oh my gosh, because you were talking about the advice that exists. And I realized a lot of that advice is actually, some of it maybe unintentionally shaming
yeah.
people who
It's like, well,
do
maybe
something.
you should try this because I tried this and I want to feel good about my choices. So you should also try this, you know? And it is like shaming. It's not really advice. Or it's trying to like, sometimes we don't trust our own choices. So we have to make sure other people make the same choices to validate our choices. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
And I've seen that happen a lot too. I mean, with motherhood, it's huge, whether what your kids eat, if you have a midwife or go to the hospital, if you vaccinate or if you don't, if you send them to private school or public school, whatever it is, people just really want you to do what they do to validate their choices, because it's really scary to make choices that affect someone's life forever. And if you don't feel really good about your choices and trust your choices, it's all too easy to kind of shame someone else, like you're saying.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also, I mean, shame is such a powerful energy that when we feel shamed, we're going to be like, oh, shoot, I don't want to be bad.
I
Let
don't want
me
to feel
quick
like, yeah.
follow exactly what they've said.
Mhm.
Where if we had taken a breath, or you said, just feel more connected to our own truth, we might go, hey, I
Mhm.
don't need to do that. There's, through this company that I work for, they send out phishing emails now and again to basically check like whether or not as employees um, we're paying attention to essentially phishing scams that might try and like steal all this money. And the only one that I've ever fallen for was a site that you visited was restricted, and you need to have this meeting with your boss about like the restricted site that you visited. It was basically like
Oh,
shaming me, but they're sending it out as an IT group, purposefully phishing to see how employees are going to respond. But my reaction was just like, I did something wrong. I've done something bad. And so of course I clicked it, where like it was clickbait. That was the
yeah.
whole intention. I hadn't done anything wrong. It was just like, oh, if we use this energy of you are wrong, you've done something wrong, people are going
You'll
to say, yes,
respond. Yeah.
yeah, I've done it wrong. Whereas it's like, I'm a prince and I need your money. You're like, nah, delete. Like, I understand that that's not true. But oh shoot, like what restricted site I've done, this
I'm in
terror,
trouble. Someone's upset
fear.
with me. Someone doesn't approve of what I did. Yeah, it's a different
That
energy for
impulse is
sure.
so strong.
Mhm.
So yeah, absolutely. I can understand just that importance of feeling really secure within yourself.
I'm curious about reading that book and that chapter now too, because I could definitely be biased, and I know every archetype is powerful in its own right, but I feel like the archetype of the mother may potentially be one of the most powerful. And I'm not even just saying people who birth children, but we know like through Kabbalah too, like Bina, the primal mother, is the Sephra, is the space where like we can hold all things, like the deepest sorrow and the deepest joy, which as a mother, we can like translate this literally to only a mother can understand the deepest joy of having a child and the deepest sorrow of losing a child. I don't think there's anything outside that spectrum, right? I don't know, but
I agree. I'm on that mission with you. I think of it a little bit differently, but
mm,
I'm like, every person in this world has a mother.
mm,
And if you think that somebody is not a good human, I can guarantee, and this is not to shame any mother, but I can guarantee that had they had a more nurturing, a tighter knit family experience, had whatever that childhood been just a little bit more loving, they probably would be a better person. That
yeah,
so much of the issues that we bring into our adulthood stem from childhood. And again, I'll say it, from our parents doing their absolute best, their absolute best. But let's be real that if they haven't done a lot of inner work, if they haven't, questioned themselves on a very deep level, they're going to be acting out of following the norms of society, which really might not be for the best of themselves, for their
yeah,
child, or, whatever. And again, it's not to shame anybody. It's just to stress that importance. Like, had that mother, because she had learned more, because she had a better mother, whatever that reality is that could have helped her elevate to that next level, had she been there. Sometimes people don't have mothers in their lives, and that's also a great sadness. Had that family
mhm.
unit been stronger for whatever reason, I know that they would have become
A different person.
slightly better humans.
Yeah,
And then very quickly, the reality of the world that we live in changes. Like, if mothers become valued in a much greater sense today, starting today,
hmm,
the reality of the world tomorrow is already so vastly different. I didn't need to give
yeah,
anybody more money. I didn't need to, I don't know what, like give all these high level government officials professional development training or even initiation or spiritual understanding. I didn't have to do any of that. I just had to make mothers know their value, and then also maybe support them, or you give them what they need so that they can actually be a mother in a greater sense. And all of a sudden, the next wave of children are doing better. And that means that our future is doing better.
absolutely, Julie. I'm really into Waldorf philosophy too, and it's we're looking at talking about the same thing where it's like if children were raised differently starting today, the world would be different. And it's not by like some kind of magical and this translates specifically into mothers, right? So if mothers, it's not like they have to follow a specific ideology or a specific set of rules or a specific mama guru or whatever. It's about if mothers had the ability to hold the space and the safety for children to become who they are meant to be, the world would be a very different place. And I think for women and for mothers to be able to hold that space, it comes back to what we were saying. We have to have a whole different level of inner knowing and inner trust in ourselves, in our choices, in our power, in our magic, um,
In our
in our
relationship
influence.
with our partners, if we have a partner.
Mm-hmm. And so like what we do, and Waldorf teachers are trained this way, it's not about what you teach, it's about who you are. You're supposed to be the utmost example of what a human being is as a Waldorf teacher. And so I would say the same as a mother or father. It's like, who do you want your child to become? It's not about telling them who to be or giving them rules and discipline and punishment around what you want from them. It's about, of course, having boundaries and expectations for what is acceptable and not acceptable in your home or in the society that you live in that ultimately keeps them safe. But it's mostly about giving them the space to become who they're meant to be. And this totally translates to what you were saying. If you meet someone who you don't think is so nice of a person, I bet they could have just had maybe a different experience in their childhood that would have changed who they became as an adult. And comes back to what you're saying too, like the power of the mother. I mean, we raise kids, and it's not just that we raise the kids, fathers also help raise kids, but we create the container in which our family lives. We create the expectations, the boundaries, the rules, and the beauty and the magic and the inspiration.
And that nurturing love, which every
Mhm.
human needs and desires. And so often when we don't feel loved, we act out as adults as well, although our temper tantrums might look a little bit different and be as extreme as war or violence to another human. You know, that at its core is an expression of not knowing yourself, but also not loving yourself and not loving your brothers and sisters.
Yeah, it's true. There's just so much magic in motherhood, and I've chosen to look at it as like a healing path in itself, where if you're looking for a a path that's going to make you look at your negative ego nonstop, test your patience.
We already talked about the sexual upgrade, so that's part of it too. You gotta add a little pleasure.
No, but I mean, it's really hard. And I think people talk about it's hard because it's relentless and poopy diapers and tireless nights. Yeah, sure. But it's really hard because if you're trying to be a mother in the way that you want to create the space for your child to become who they're meant to be and not put your bullshit on them, I'm constantly having to look at what I'm doing all the time, how I'm speaking, why I'm setting certain boundaries, creating a hard line and then sometimes erasing it, making hard choices and having to wait for the outcome. There's just so much, it builds so much patience and so much inner trust. And like I said, if I'm looking at it as a path to becoming a better person, parenting and being a mother and being a wife is a completely different experience than if perhaps older generations looked at us like, I'm the adult and I'm going to teach this child how to be an adult. I am a person and I know everything and I'm going to teach you about how being a person should look. And I personally know that I'm not perfect. And I know my daughter is probably closer to perfection than I am. So I'm trying to just preserve that perfection. And she actually ends up teaching me way more about being a good person than I could ever teach her, to be quite honest.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I feel like specifically when COVID started and all of a sudden me, my daughter and my husband became virtually stay at home all the time I think for us, it was a total of 8 weeks. It was relentless and it was intense. And I was starting to get super burnt out. And this is when I actually started getting really into Waldorf philosophies, not so much about teaching, but about home life and how we can look at having a family and raising children as a chore that will be over in 18 years, or we can look at it as this super magical experience to know ourselves and know our children and nurture the growth in ourselves and in our children and our family in a deeper way. And it's all perspective shift, which is really kind of magical. We were all doing the same things. It was just about how I was looking at things that completely changed how I reacted. And I mean, when this comes back to relationship, it's just like, it's all too easy just to put everything into being a mom, and if you do that and it's exhausting and it's tiring, you don't have energy for your partnership. But if you find whatever system it is that creates balance and creates joy and creates whatever it is that helps you enjoy being a mother, is going to help you be a better wife, and the family will just follow. Hopefully. I love having a family. And just recently I've realized how much I enjoy having a family and how special it is to have this and I have a small family. It's just me and my husband and one child, but how I want to keep it sacred and precious, and how it's just this wild balancing act that requires all of us to at least strive to be our best all the time. It's a lot to ask from a little kid, but at least I give her the space and the parameters and the safety and the resources to be her best self, hopefully. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what life is. Like, that's that experience of being alive. And each day meeting life a little bit differently. And some days we're wonky and other days we're doing better. But having that self-reliance and knowing for ourselves, I can handle this and I can meet life because I've been given that space to discover for myself that I don't need somebody to hold my hand my entire life. I can do it.
And if I mess up, someone will embrace me with open arms and love me and not
Yeah.
shame me. That's a big one. Like, so many people, I think, are afraid of making mistakes because of they had to be perfect as a child too,
Having support. We need support.
Yeah, we need support. And like you were saying, that loving and that nurturing of like, you can always fall back into this, you can always fall back into your mother. But she won't like fix it for you, or do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, that safe space that you were talking about, that they provide, that loving, safe space.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I know, Julie, I don't know if we talked about this on the last video, but we've talked about it for sure before, where it's like almost all issues stem from like inner child work, right? But the inner child is just a result of how we parent, is a result of the family. So I think I'm realizing too right now, like where I was saying, like protecting the sanctity of family, if that is what you choose, is so important. No doubt, I think that there can be wonderful results and wonderful children that come out of really healthy co-parenting and really healthy single parents. But if what you choose is a family, there's something really wonderful that can come out of that. And so many families fail. And usually through the failure of family comes a lot of trauma, right? So yeah, I think everyone chooses to start a family for different reasons, but I can only look at myself and I can only look at why I chose to have a family. What I hope for people is that if they want to live their life side by side with someone that they love and trust and wholeheartedly believe in, and then also want to create a person out of that love and out of that vision, like that's what I would love to see family be in the future, is children that are come into this world because they were desired and because their parents want to make the world a better place,
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be nice.
It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. And there's, again, no shame if your family breaks up. Maybe that's the highest good.
Yeah.
Some things are short-term and they go their route and it's over. And that's
children will come regardless. So it's like, I even think about, like, I have friends who are single parents, and like, that is what is meant to be, do I hope for them that someday they also share their life with someone who loves them deeply, who shares a similar purpose and mission and view of the world and of life? Yes, of course. I don't think like the goal of life is partnership, but I think that there's so much joy that comes from it. So if that's what they want, I would wish that for them wholeheartedly. But when it comes to love and relationship and family, it's funny because I feel like I end up talking about being a mother more than a relationship more during this. But I think that's where relationships suffer when it comes to having a family, is because like the distortion around motherhood is so prevalent. And like you said, it's like they're the most powerful and they hold so much. I don't think mothers understand that if they were living in authenticity and alignment with themselves, like you said, like how quickly the world would shift.
Yep. So listeners, we wish it for all of you, whether you are currently a mother, whether you hope to be a mother. Maybe that's not even part of your plan, but
maybe you're a cool aunt. Cool aunts are mother archetypes too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But activating that understanding within yourself around, how you want to show up in the world, and then trusting yourself to do that.
Yeah.
It's been so lovely to have you, Danielle. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who tuned in, and until next time.
Thank you.